Hey, AP1 students, we're back for lab number 4. Last time we met, lab number 3, was on epithelial tissue. And we spent most of the time talking about simple epithelia. Remember, simple epithelia only had one layer of cells? Today we're going to talk about stratified epithelia. And stratified epithelia, of course, have multiple layers of cells. So this blue line right here, this is a stratified epithelium, is actually part of your skin. This epithelial layer in your skin, this stratified epithelium in your skin, is something called the epidermis. So this is the epidermis that we're looking at with the blue bracket here. And I can see just so many nuclei, so many rows of nuclei, and that's why it's a stratified epithelium. Now, this is the epidermis right here, which is one of the two big layers of our skin. The other layer down here, which is not epithelial tissue, it's actually connective tissue. This is called the dermis. We're going to deal with the dermis later on when we do connective tissues. I do want you to notice that there is this wavy interface between the epidermis and the dermis. And what this is going to do, it's going to help lock these two skin layers together. Now, by the way, the skin we are looking at here is what is called thick skin, which is only found in your palmar and plantar surfaces. So palm of your hand and sole of your feet. And thick skin, of course, is thicker. It's better for protection, resisting abrasion, that sort of thing. Okay, let's get into a little more detail about this epithelium, about this epidermis here. All right? So most of the cells, so again, many cells, many layers stratified, most of the cells in here, whether they're kind of roundish and big with visible nuclei or kind of granular, or whether they've been squished flat and are dead. In fact, these cells up here are dead. Most of the cells in the epidermis are these guys called keratinocytes, which are cells that contain keratin. Keratin is this tough, waterproof, protective protein. Now, in the deeper epidermis, there are other cell varieties, including melanocytes. Including melanocytes. Melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin, which of course is the pigment that protects the skin from ultraviolet radiation. Now, I don't see any melanocytes here, but I do have to know that they exist. Okay, so thick skin is what we're looking at, dermis down here, epidermis up here. Epidermis is stratified squamous epithelial tissue, and most of the cells in here are keratinocytes. Now, what we do with this epidermis is we actually divide it up into sublayers. So, at the very deepest part, the basalmost row of cells in the epidermis is called the stratum basale. Stratum just means layer, and then basale means basalmost. Okay, so the base layer, in other words, is the stratum basale. And I'm going to cover just about all the stratum basale here. There we go. Messed up a little bit right there. But you get the drift. Now, above the stratum basale is a layer with multiple rows of cells, and this is called the stratum spinosum. One of the things we mentioned last video was that epithelial cells have special connections, and one of the special connections was this really strong one called the desmosomes. And if we were actually to zoom in, like between these two cells right here, we would be able to see little tiny desmosomes connecting these cells. And the desmosomes, when you zoom in, give it a spiny appearance, hence stratum spinosum. Then our next layer, which is definitely more purple-ish, the purple-er layer, it's more purple because the cells are granular. They have these little granules in them, little purple bags, and this is called my stratum granulosum. Then there is a layer that I see right here. It's kind of clear-ish. So it's called the stratum lucidum. Lucidum means clear. And by the way, this one is only found in thick skin, so on the palmar and plantar surfaces. It's not found in the thin skin that's anywhere else. And then finally, my apical layer, my superficial layer, is a layer of just dead cells that are basically just bags of keratin at this point. And this layer is called the stratum corneum. Corneum means horn because the same keratin that we find in these skin cells is the keratin that makes up a lot of animal horns. Okay, good deal. What we're going to do now is switch gears and look at a model. So this is a skin model. Now what I'm actually seeing here is thin skin. Thin skin, okay? Thin skin is found everywhere except for plantar and palmar surfaces. Notice the hair in the thin skin. We got hair here. Thick skin has no hair. Thin skin has hair. Now, the skin contains two layers, the purple and the blue here. Purple is epidermis, and then blue is epidermis, purple is dermis. The epidermis is my epithelial layer of my skin. The dermis is my connective tissue layer of my skin. Now, beneath the skin, in other words, deep to the skin, is a layer of connective tissue, mostly adipose, which is fat, called the hypodermis. So these yellow guys down here are adipocytes, fat cells, and they are in the hypodermis, which is a layer deep to the skin, not part of the skin. Skin is dermis and epidermis, and this is thin skin because we see hair here. So we know it's not thick skin, which is palmar and plantar only. Okay, what I can see in this thin skin is 4 of those epidermal layers. All right, remember, thin skin is going to lack a stratum lucidum. So it'll have this stratum basale right here, and then above the stratum basale, it'll have a spinosum, and then above the spinosum, it'll have a granulosum, and then above the granulosum, it'll have a corneum. So those are my strata, my layers of my epidermis of my thin skin. All right, cool. We've now switched gears to another part of our model. This part displays thick skin. Notice that again, I've got my epidermis. Of course, the epidermis is thicker now. And now I've also got my dermis. So my epidermis is up top, superficial. Then my connective tissue dermis. And then a separate part, not part of the skin itself, is going to be my hypodermis down here. Now, my epidermis in my thick skin has all 5 layers. Notice how the corneum is really thick here. Gives us more protection. And then the lucidum is the white line here on deep to the corneum. Then the purple one is the granulosum. Then we got the spinosum, and the final single row of cells is the basale. And again, notice the waviness, which helps interlock the epidermis to the dermis. Okay, speaking of the dermis, it is the connective tissue layer of our skin. Lots of cool stuff going on in the dermis. It actually has 2 sublayers of itself. It has a more superficial layer, about maybe a fifth of it, called the papillary layer, and then a deeper layer called the reticular layer. And we're going to look at both of these in more detail when we get to the connective tissue labs. But one of the final things about the dermis we got to know is it does have these upward projecting bulges. These bulges are called papillae. Papilla is a bump. Papillae means bumps. And dermal means of the dermis. So these are dermal papillae. They are going to help interlock the dermis with the overlying epidermis, anchoring the two layers together so they don't get sheared apart. All right, let's get rid of that. Now there are some other things to worry about, including this layer that is adjacent to but not part of the skin. This is the hypodermis, primarily made of adipose tissue, which is going to give us protection as well as thermal insulation, like preventing heat loss. Now we got to deal with some of the other things in skin, some of these other dermal accessory organs. We have a variety of glands and a couple other things going on here, okay? We are going to start with this whitish gland. This is called a merocrine sweat gland. It's got this duct, and then it coils into this ball here. The merocrine sweat gland, we got millions of them. They're all over our body. They make a watery sweat that is essential for thermoregulation, for cooling us down. Remember, when sweat evaporates, it goes from liquid to gas, and that is going to steal heat from our body. So that is a merocrine sweat gland, and you see another merocrine sweat gland cut in section over here. And right next to this merocrine sweat gland is an apocrine sweat gland. Notice it is bigger. It is got a bigger diameter. It's just, cells look bigger too. Apocrine sweat glands are only found in a few regions. Axillary region, pubic region, anal region as well. Apocrine sweat glands are basically kind of useless for humans. So they make a more nutrient-rich sweat that bacteria feed upon, and then that creates an odor. And that sweat and that odor is used amongst other mammals to mark their territory, to attract mates, to do things like that. Humans, we don't use apocrine sweat to attract mates. We're not rubbing armpit sweat in our front yard to mark it as our territory. But we still have these vestigial structures. Now my third gland I can see here, always associated with a hair follicle, outlined in red here. This is a sebaceous gland. I got another one over here. Sebaceous glands are always with hair. So notice then that they're not going to be on thick skin, which is palmar or plantar. Sebaceous glands make something called sebum. And sebum is this moisturizing oil that tries to help prevent our skin from drying out. Now, the last accessory structure we can see here is this muscle attached to a hair follicle. It's a little strip of smooth muscle. Smooth muscle meaning you don't control it. It is called an arrector pili muscle. Arrector means straightener of the hair. And arrector pili muscles, they're responsible for goosebumps. So when you're scared or when you're cold, this muscle contracts, primarily because you're turning on this thing called your fight or flight system, your sympathetic nervous system. And when these arrector pili muscles contract, the hair straightens out. Now, this is something else that's basically non-functional in humans, because other furrier animals, because they're furrier, when they do their arrector pili contraction, the hairs stand up. That actually traps a layer of warm air next to their skin. Their fur will trap more warm air. We're not furry enough to do that. Also, other mammals use this straightening of the hair, this piloerection, in order to make them appear larger, more fierce. Predator and prey alike do that. Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. Whoopsie. I think that's it for our accessories. Yeah, and that's it for skin as well. It's going to be the easiest, quickest recording of the semester. So another place where we have a stratified epithelium. Notice I got multiple cell layers here, multiple nuclei. This is in the urinary bladder. It's called transitional epithelium. It's also called urothelium. Got a relaxed urinary bladder, so it's like kind of empty. On this side, this is a more full urinary bladder. And in the relaxed bladder, the cells take on this curved dome-shaped appearance. They're sometimes called umbrella cells because someone thought, well, looks like an umbrella. It's a pretty crappy umbrella, but you get the idea. And what happens is these cells will flatten out. They'll change their shape as the urinary bladder fills up with urine. So the transitional epithelium, it can stretch, and that lets it perform its function very nicely. So transitional epithelium, urinary bladder, look for those dome-shaped umbrella cells on the apical surface. The lumen would be up here. Okay, we're almost done, folks. Almost done. The final thing we're going to look at is a cross-section of a sweat gland duct. Remember the sweat glands? Let's pretend that we slice this one like that, okay? And when we do that, and we look at it under the microscope, we get this nice ring here. Here is the lumen. Right there is where sweat would be found. And check out the nuclei in the cells adjacent to the lumen. This is epithelium. Multiple nuclei means it's stratified. They're circular-ish. So this is a stratified cuboidal epithelium. And wow, that is our last slide, I think, of this one. 17 minutes. Super quick one today. Nice to have a little shorter one every now and again. And as always, thanks for watching. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.